secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur event. I am your host, Walter Hendricks, coming to you from Holland. Today is the 9th of July 2016. It's just a bit past 4 p.m. in the Netherlands, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every Saturday, the Solvinur event live. Which means you can join if you like. Get your Skype open, contact me at Solvinur, Solvinur, and you can join the live show. Check out also the website reallibertymedia.com. There at channel 6 you will also see UCY and many other channels you can choose from. Also check out rlmradio.xyz. There you can see, if you scroll down a bit, Grammy's Rocket Chair, 7 p.m. Wednesdays and Fridays. And at 11 p.m. on Fridays, the Freakers Ball. And so check it out. You should have some strange extension in your bladwijzers, how do you say in Dutch? I don't know what they are in English. rlmradio.xyz. Alright. How's everybody doing in the chat? You can go there by going to ucy.tv and find the chat link over there. There's already 14 people in there. Bacon, Cap, and Cracker, and Grump, and Lone Frog, Jane, JJ, Juana Taco, Logan Hogg, Otto, Cheryl, and Vince, and One Anon, and me. And that's the roll call. How you doing, everybody? Today we're going to continue with Brave New World, where we left off last week. And I was listening to UCY. It's must be like, I don't know, 7 a.m. for you guys over there when he's on. And he was talking about anarchism and some other subject, and all of a sudden he said, it makes you wonder if we shouldn't be focusing more on Brave New World and Brave New World Revisited. So I was like, wow, that's good to hear, you know. I'm exactly doing what William Roberts proposed. So I got a lot of respect for him. He's unfortunately passed away, but you can still hear him on UCY.tv. Lots of interviews with Vicky Davis, which are very interesting. All about sustainable development. All right, my lighter is working, so we can get the show on the road. This is where we left off, guys. Paragraph 2. I think that's where we left off, because my browser crashed again and it doesn't jump back to where we were. So if this sounds familiar, it's probably because we did this. But till I'm not quite sure, we'll just start here, till I'm sure. Halting for a moment outside the door of the director's room, Bernard drew a deep breath and squared his shoulders, bracing himself to meet the dislike and disapproval which he was certain of finding within. He knocked and entered. I think we did this, right? A permit for you to initial, director, he said as airily as possible, and laid the paper on the writing table. The director glanced at him sourly, but the stamp of the World Controller's office was at the head of the paper, and the signature of Mustafa Mond, bold and black, across the bottom. Okay, this sounds new. Everything was perfectly in order. The director had no choice. He penciled his initials, 2 small pale letters, abject at the feet of Mustafa Mond, and was about to return the paper without a word of comment or genial Ford speed. When his eye was caught by something written in the body of the permit. For the New Mexican reservation, he said, and his tone, the face he lifted to Bernard, expressed a kind of agitated astonishment. Surprised by his surprise, Bernard nodded. There was a silence. The director leaned back in his chair, frowning. How long ago was it? He said, speaking more to himself than Bernard. 20 years, I suppose. Nearer 25. I must have been your age. He sighed and shook his head. Bernard felt extremely uncomfortable. A man so conventional, so scrupulously correct as the director, and to commit so gross a solecism. It made him want to hide his face, to run out of the room. Not that he himself saw anything intrinsically objectionable in people talking about the remote past. That was one of those hypnopathic prejudices he had, so he imagined, completely got rid of. What made him feel shy was the knowledge that the director disapproved and yet had betrayed into doing the forbidden thing. Under what inward compulsion? Through his discomfort, Bernard eagerly listened. I had the same idea as you, the director was saying. Wanted to have a look at the savages. Got a permit for New Mexico and went there for my summer holiday. With the girl I was having at the moment. She was a beta minus, and I think, he shut his eyes, I think she had yellow hair. Anyhow, she was pneumatic, particularly pneumatic, I remember that. Well, we went there, and we looked at the savages, and we rode out on horse and all that. And then It was almost the last day of my leave, then, well, she got lost. We'd gone riding up one of those revolting mountains, and it was horrible hot and oppressive, and after lunch we went to sleep, or at least I did. She must have gone for a walk, alone. At any rate, when I woke up, she wasn't there, and the most frightful thunderstorm I've ever seen was just bursting on us. And it poured and roared and flashed, and the horses broke loose and ran away, and I fell down, trying to catch them, and hurt my knee, so that I could hardly walk. Still I searched, and I shouted and I searched, but there was no sign of her. Then I thought she must have gone back to the rest house by herself, so I crawled down into the valley by the way we had come. My knee was agonizingly painful, and I'd lost my soma. It took me hours. I didn't get back to the rest house till after midnight. And she wasn't there. The director repeated, she wasn't there. There was a silence. Well, he resumed at last, the next day there was a search, but we couldn't find her. She must have fallen into a gully somewhere, or been eaten by a mountain lion. Ford knows. Anyhow, it was horrible. It upset me very much at the time. More than it ought to have done, I dare say, because, after all, it's the sort of accident that might happen to anyone. And, of course, the social body persists, although the component cells may change. But this sleep-taught consolation did not seem to be very effective. Shaking his head, I actually dream about it sometimes, the director went on in a low voice. Dream of being woken up by that peal of thunder and finding her gone. Dream of searching and searching for her under the trees. He lapsed into the silence of reminiscence. You must have had a terrible shock, said Bernard, almost enviously. At the sound of his voice, the director started into a guilty realization of where he was, shot a glance at Bernard, and, averting his eyes, blushed darkly, looked at him again with sudden suspicion and, angrily on his dignity. Don't imagine, he said, that I'd had any indecorous relation with the girl. Nothing emotional, nothing long drawn. It was all perfectly healthy and normal. He handed Bernard the permit. I really don't know why I bored you with this trivial anecdote. Furious with himself for having given away a discreditable secret, he vented his rage on Bernard. The look in his eyes was now frankly malignant, and I should like to take this opportunity, Mr. Marx, he went on, of saying that I'm not at all pleased with the reports I receive of your behavior outside working hours. You may say that this is not my business, but it is. I have the good name of the center to think of. My workers must be above suspicion, particularly those of the highest castes. Alphas are so conditioned that they do not have to be infantile in their emotional behavior. But that is all the more reason for making a special effort to conform. It is their duty to be infantile, even against their inclination. And so, Mr. Marx, I give you fair warning. The director's voice vibrated with an indignation that had now become wholly righteous and impersonal, was the expression of the disapproval of society itself. If ever I hear again of any lapse from a proper standard of infantile decorum, I shall ask for your transference to a subcenter, preferably to Iceland. Good morning. And swiveling round in his chair, he picked up his pen and began to write. That'll teach him, he said to himself. But he was mistaken, for Bernard left the room with a swagger exulting as he banged the door behind him in the thought that he stood alone, embattled against the order of things, elated by the intoxicating consciousness of his individual significance and importance. Even the thought of persecution left him undismayed, was rather tonic than depressing. He felt strong enough to meet and overcome Amixian, strong enough to face even Iceland, and this confidence was the greater for his not for a moment really believing that he would be called upon to face anything at all. People simply weren't transferred for things like that. Iceland was just a threat, a most stimulating and life-giving threat. Walking along the corridor, he actually whistled. Heroic was the account he gave that evening of his interview with the DHC, whereupon, it concluded, I simply told him to go to the bottomless past and marched out of the room. And that was that. He looked at Helmholtz Watson expectantly, awaiting his due reward of sympathy, encouragement, admiration. But no word came. Helmholtz sat silent, staring at the floor. He liked Bernard. He was grateful to him for being the only man of his acquaintance with whom he could talk about the subjects he felt to be important. Nevertheless, there were things in Bernard which he hated. This boasting, for example, and the outbursts of an abject self-pity with which it alternated, and his deplorable habit of being bald after the event, and full in absence of the most extraordinary presence of mind. He hated these things just because he liked Bernard. The seconds passed. Helmholtz continued to stare at the floor, and suddenly Bernard blushed and turned away. And that brings us to paragraph 3. The journey was quite uneventful. The Blue Pacific rocket was 2.5 minutes early at New Orleans, lost 4 minutes in a tornado over Texas, but flew into a favorable air current at longitude 95 west and was able to land at Santa Fe less than 40 seconds behind scheduled time. 40 seconds on a 6.5-hour flight. Not so bad, Lenina conceded. They slept that night at Santa Fe. The hotel was excellent, incomparably better, for example, than that horrible Aurora Bora Palace in which Lenina had suffered so much the previous summer. Liquid air, television, vibro-vacuum message, radio, boiling caffeine solution, hot contraceptives, and 8 different kinds of scent were laid on in every bedroom. The synthetic music plant was working as they entered the hall and left nothing to be desired. A notice in the lift announced that there were 60 escalator squash racket courts in the hotel, and that the obstacle and electromagnetic golf could be played in the park. But it sounds simply too lovely, cried Lenina. I almost wish we could stay here. 60 escalator squash courts. There won't be any in the reservation, Bernard warned her. And no scent, no television, no hot water even. If you feel you can't stand it, stay here till I come back. Lenina was quite offended. Of course I can't stand it. I only said it was lovely here because, well, because progress is lovely, isn't it? 500 repetitions once a week from 13 to 17, said Bernard wearily, as though to himself. What did you say? I said that progress was lovely. That's why you mustn't come to the reservation unless you really want to. But I do want to. Very well then, said Bernard, and it was almost a threat. Their permit required the signature of the warden of the reservation, at whose office next morning they duly presented themselves. An Epsilon Plus Negro porter took in Bernard's card, and they were admitted almost immediately. The warden was a blonde and brachycephalic, alpha minus, short, red, moon-faced and broad-shouldered, with a loud booming voice. Very well adapted to the utterance of hypnopathic wisdom. He was a mine of irrelevant information and unasked for good advice. Once started, he went on, boomingly. 560,000 square kilometers, divided into 4 distinct sub-reservations, each surrounded by a high-tension wire fence. At this moment, and for no apparent reason, Bernard suddenly remembered that he had left the eau de Cologne tap in his bathroom wide open and running. Supplied with the current from the Grand Canyon hydroelectric station. Cost me a fortune by the time I get back. With his mind's eye, Bernard saw the needle on the centimeter creeping round and round, ant-like, indefatigable. Quickly telephoned to Helmholtz Watson. Upwards of 5,000 kilometers of fencing at 60,000 volts. You don't say so, said Lenina politely, not knowing in the least what the warden had said, but taking her cue from his dramatic pause. When the warden started booming, she had inconspicuously swallowed half a gram of soma, with the result that she could now sit serenely, not listening, thinking of nothing at all, but with her large blue eyes fixed on the warden's face in an expression of rapt attention. To touch the fence is instant death, pronounced the warden solemnly. There is no escape from a savage reservation. The word escape was suggestive. Perhaps, said Bernard, half rising, we ought to think of going. The little black needle was scurrying, an insect, nibbling through time, eating into his money. No escape, repeated the warden, waving him back into his chair. And, as the permit was not yet countersigned, Bernard had no choice but to obey. Those who are born in the reservation, and remember, my dear young lady, he added, leering obscenely at Lenina and speaking in an improper whisper, remember that in a reservation children are still born. Yes, actually born, revolting as that may seem. He hoped that his reference to a shameful subject would make Lenina blush, but she only smiled with simulated intelligence and said, "You don't say so." Disappointed, the warden began again. "Those, I repeat, who are born in a reservation are destined to die there." Destined to die. A deciliter of eau de cologne every minute, 6 liters an hour. Perhaps Bernard tried again. We ought. Leaning forward, the warden tapped the table with his forefinger. "You ask me how many people live in the reservation, and I reply, triumphantly, I reply that we do not know. We can only guess." "You don't say so." My dear young lady, I do say so." Chippa, chippa, chippa. 6 times 24. No, it would be nearer 6 times 36. Bernard was pale and trembling with impatience, but inexorably the booming continued. "About 60,000 Indians and half-breeds, absolute savages. Our inspectors occasionally visit, otherwise no communication whatever with the civilized world. Still preserve their repulsive habits and customs, marriage, if you know what that is, my dear young lady, families. No conditioning, monstrous superstitions, Christianity and totemism, and ancestor worship. Extinct languages such as Zuni and Spanish and Athapascan, pumas, porcupines and other ferocious animals, infectious diseases, priests, venomous lizards." "You don't say so." They got away at last. Bernard dashed to the telephone. Quick, quick! But it took him nearly 3 minutes to get on to Helmholtz Watson. "We might be among the savages already," he complained. "Damned incompetence." "Have a gram," suggested Lenina. He refused, preferring his anger. And at last, thank Ford, he was through, and, yes, it was Helmholtz, to whom he explained what had happened, and who promised to go round at once, and turn off the tap. Yes, at once, but took his opportunity to tell him what the DHC had said in public yesterday evening. "What? He's looking out for someone to take my place?" Bernard's voice was agonized. "So it's actually decided? Did he mention Iceland? You say he did? Ford, Iceland." He hung up the receiver and turned back to Lenina. His face was pale, his expression utterly dejected. "What's the matter?" she asked. "The matter?" He dropped heavily into a chair. "I'm going to be sent to Iceland." Often in the past he had wondered what it would be like to be subjected, soma-less and with nothing but his own inward resources to rely on, to some great trial, some pain, some persecution. He had even longed for affliction. As recently as a week ago, in the director's office, he had imagined himself courageously resisting, stoically accepting suffering without a word. The director's threats had actually elated him, made him feel larger than life. But that, as he now realized, was because he had not taken the threats quite seriously. He had not believed that, when it came to the point, the DHC would ever do anything. Now that it looked as though the threats were really to be fulfilled, Bernard was appalled. Of that imagined stoicism, that theoretical courage, not a trace was left. He raged against himself. What a fool! Against the director. How unfair not to give him that other chance. That other chance, which he now had no doubt at all he had always intended to take. And Iceland. Lenina shook her head. Was and will make me ill, she quoted. I take a gram and only am. In the end, she persuaded him to swallow 4 tablets of soma. 5 minutes later, roots and fruits were abolished. The flower of the present rosily blossomed. A message from the porter announced that, at the warden's orders, a reservation guard had come round with a plane and was waiting on the roof of the hotel. They went up at once. An octoroon in gamma-green uniform saluted and proceeded to recite the morning's program. A bird's-eye view of 10 or a dozen of the principal pueblos, then a landing for lunch in the valley of Malpay. The rest house was comfortably there, and up at the pueblo the savages would probably be celebrating their summer festival. It would be the best place to spend the night. They took their seats in the plane and set off. 10 minutes later, they were crossing the frontier that separated civilization from savagery. Uphill and down, across the desert of salt or sand, through forests, into the violet depth of canyons, over crag and peak and table-topped mesa. The fence marched on, irresistibly the straight line, the geometrical symbol of triumphant human purpose. And at its foot, here and there, a mosaic of white bones. A still unrotted carcass, dark on the tawny ground, marked the place where deer or steer, puma or porcupine or coyote, or the greedy turkey buzzards, drawn down by the whiff of carrion and fulminated as though by a poetic justice, had come too close to the destroying wires. They never learn, said the green-uniformed pilot, pointing down at the skeletons on the ground below them. And they never will learn, he added, and laughed, as though he had somehow scored a personal triumph over the electrocuted animals. Bernard also laughed. After 2 grams of soma, the joke seemed, for some reason, good. Laughed and then, almost immediately, dropped off to sleep. And sleeping was carried over Taos and Tesuque, over Nambe and Picuris and Pojoaque, over Sia and Cochiti, over Laguna and Acoma, and the enchanted Mesa, over Zuni and Cibola and Ojo Caliente, and woke at last to find the machine standing on the ground, Lenina carrying the suitcases into a small square house, and the gamma-green octoroon talking incomprehensibly with a young Indian. Malpay, explained the pilot as Bernard stepped out. This is the rest house, and there's a dance this afternoon at the Pueblo. He'll take you there." He pointed to the sullen young savage. "Funny, I expect." He grinned. "Everything they do is funny." And with that he climbed into the plane and started up the engines. "Back tomorrow, and remember," he added reassuringly to Lenina, "they're perfectly tame. Savages won't do you any harm. They've got enough experience of gas bombs to know that they mustn't play any tricks." Still laughing, he threw the helicopter screws into gear, accelerated, and was gone. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Lots of empty space. And then we arrive at 7. Hold on, guys. All right, chapter 7. The mesa was like a ship becalmed in a strait of lion-colored dust. The channel wound between precipitous banks, and slanting from one wall to the other across the valley ran a streak of green, the river and its fields. On the prow of that stone ship in the center of the strait, and seemingly a part of it, a shaped and geometrical outcrop of the naked rock, stood the Pueblo of Malpay. Block above block, each story smaller than the one below, the tall houses rose like stepped and amputated pyramids into the blue sky. At their feet lay a straggle of low buildings, a crisscross of walls, and on 3 sides the precipices fell sheer into the plain. A few columns of smoke mounted perpendicularly into the windless air and were lost. "Queer," said Lenina, "very queer." It was her ordinary word of condemnation. "I don't like it, and I don't like that man." She pointed to the Indian guide who had been appointed to take them up to the Pueblo. Her feeling was evidently reciprocated. The very back of the man, as he walked along before them, was hostile, sullenly contemptuous. "Besides," she lowered her voice, "he smells." Bernard did not attempt to deny it. They walked on. Suddenly it was as though the whole air had come alive and were pulsing with the indefatigable movement of blood. Up there, in Malpay, the drums were beaten. Their feet fell in with the rhythm of that mysterious heart. They quickened their pace. Their path led them to the foot of the precipice. The sides of the great mesa ship towered over them, 300 feet to the gunwale. "I wish we could have brought the plane," said Lenina, looking up resentfully at the black, impending rock face. "I hate walking, and you feel so small when you're on the ground at the bottom of a hill." They walked along for some way in the shadow of the mesa, rounded a projection, and there, in a water-worn ravine, was the way up, the companion ladder. They climbed. It was very steep path that zigzagged from side to side of the gully. Sometimes the pulsing of the drums was all but inaudible. At others they seemed to be beating only just round the corner. When they were halfway up, An eagle flew past so close to them that the wind of his wings blew chill in their faces. In a crevice of the rock lay a pile of bones. It was all oppressively queer, and the Indian smelled stronger and stronger. They emerged at last from the ravine into the full sunlight. The top of the mesa was a flat deck of stone. "Like the charring tea-tower," was Lenina's comment. But she was not allowed to enjoy her discovery of this reassuring resemblance for long. A padding of soft feet made them turn round. Naked from throat to navel, their dark brown bodies painted with white lines. "Like asphalt tennis courts," Lenina was later to explain. Their faces inhuman with daubings of scarlet, black and ochre. 2 Indians came running along the path. Their black hair was braided with fox fur and red flannel. Cloaks of turkey feather fluttered from their shoulders. Huge feather diadems exploded gaudily round their heads. With every step they took came the clink and rattle of their silver bracelets. Their heavy necklaces of bone and turquoise beads. They came on without a word, running quietly in their deerskin moccasins. One of them was holding a feather brush, the other carried in either hand what looked at a distance like 3 or 4 pieces of thick rope. One of the ropes writhed uneasily, and suddenly Lenina saw that they were snakes. The men came nearer and nearer. Their dark eyes looked at her, but without giving any sign of recognition, any smallest sign that they had seen her or were aware of her existence. The writhing snake hung limp again with the rest. The men paused. I don't like it, said Lenina. She liked even less what awaited her at the entrance to the pueblo, where their guide had left them while he went inside for instructions. The dirt, to start with, the piles of rubbish, the dust, the dogs, the flies. Her face wrinkled up into a grimace of disgust. She held her handkerchief to her nose. But how can they live like this? She broke out in a voice of indignant incredulity. It wasn't possible. Bernard shrugged his shoulders philosophically. Anyhow, he said, they've been doing it for the last 5,000 or 6,000 years, so I suppose they must be used to it by now. But cleanliness is next to fortliness, she insisted. Yes, and civilization is sterilization, Bernard went on, concluding on a tone of irony the second hypnopedic lesson in elementary hygiene. But these people had never heard of our fort, and they aren't civilized, so there's no point in... Oh, she grasped his arm. Look. An almost naked Indian was very slowly climbing down the ladder from the first-floor terrace of a neighboring house, rung after rung, with the tremulous caution of extreme old age. Blah, blah, blah. Let me fix my ciggy here. Coffee. His face was profoundly wrinkled and black, like a mask of obsidian. The toothless mouth had fallen in, and at the corners of the lips, and on each side of the chin, a few long bristles gleamed almost white against the dark skin. The long, unbraided hair hung down in grey wisps round his face. His body was bent and emaciated to the bone, almost fleshless. Very slowly he came down, pausing at each rung before he ventured another step. "What's the matter with him?" whispered Lenina. Her eyes were wide with horror and amazement. "He's old, that's all," Bernard answered as carelessly as he could. He too was startled, but he made an effort to seem unmoved. "Old?" she repeated. "But the director is old. Lots of people are old. They're not like that." "That's because we don't allow them to be like that. We preserve them from diseases. We keep their internal secretions artificially balanced at a youthful equilibrium. We don't permit their magnesium-calcium ratio to fall below what it was at 30. We give them transfusion of young blood. We keep their metabolism permanently stimulated. So, of course, they don't look like that. Partly," he added, "because most of them die long before they reach this old creature's age. Youth almost unimpaired till 60, and then crack, the end." But Lenina was not listening. She was watching the old man. Slowly he came down. His feet touched the ground. He turned. In his deep-sunken orbits, his eyes were still extraordinarily bright. They looked at her for a long moment expressionlessly, without surprise, as though she had not been there at all. Then, slowly, with bent back, the old man hobbled past them and was gone. "But it's terrible," Lenina whispered. "It's awful. We ought not to have come here." She felt in her pocket for her soma, only to discover that, by some unprecedented oversight, she had left the bottle down at the rest house. Bernard's pockets were also empty. Lenina was left to face the horrors of Malpais unaided. They were crowding in on her thick and fast. The spectacle of two young women giving breast to their babies made her blush and turn away her face. She had never seen anything so indecent in her life, and what made it worse was that, instead of tactfully ignoring it, Bernard proceeded to make open comments on this revoltingly viviparous scene. Ashamed, now that the effects of the soma had worn off, of the weakness he had displayed that morning in the hotel, he went out of his way to show himself strong and unorthodox. "What a wonderfully intimate relationship," he said, deliberately outrageous. "And what an intensity of feeling it must generate. I often think one may have missed something in not having had a mother. And perhaps you've missed something in not being a mother, Lenina. Imagine yourself sitting there with a little baby of your own." "Bernard, how can you? The passage of an old woman with ophthalmia and the disease of the skin distracted her from her indignation. "Let's go away," she begged. "I don't like it." But at this moment their guide came back, and, beckoning them to follow, led the way down the narrow street between the houses. They rounded a corner. A dead dog was lying on a rubbish heap, and a woman with a goitre was looking for lice in the hair of a small girl. Their guide halted at the foot of a ladder, raised his hand perpendicularly, then darted it horizontally forward. They did what he mutely commanded, climbed the ladder and walked through the doorway, to which it gave access, into a long, narrow room, rather dark and smelling of smoke and cooked grease and long-worn, long unwashed clothes. At the further end of the room was another doorway, through which came a shaft of surdite, and the noise, very loud and close, of the drums. They stepped across the threshold and found themselves on a wide terrace. Below them, shut in by the tall houses, was the village square, crowded with Indians, bright blankets, and feathers in black hair, and the glint of turquoise, and dark skins shining with heat. Lenina put her handkerchief to her nose again. In the open space at the center of the square were two circular platforms of masonry and trampled clay. The roofs, it was evident, of underground chambers, for in the center of each platform was an open hatchway, with a ladder emerging from the lower darkness. A sound of subterranean flute playing came up, and was almost lost in the steady, remorseless persistence of the drums. Lenina liked the drums. Shutting her eyes, she abandoned herself to their soft, repeated thunder, allowed it to invade her consciousness more and more completely, till at last there was nothing left in the world but that one deep pulse of sound. It reminded her reassuringly of the synthetic noises made at solidarity services and Ford's Day celebrations. Orgy-porgy, she whispered to herself. These drums beat out just the same rhythms. There was a sudden, startling burst of singing, hundreds of male voices crying out fiercely in harsh metallic unison. A few long notes and silence, the thunderous silence of the drums, then shrill, in a nigh treble, the woman's answer, then again the drums, and once more the men's deep, savage affirmation of their manhood. Queer, yes, the place was queer, so was the music. So were the clothes, and the goitrous, and the skin diseases, and the old people. But the performance itself, there seemed to be nothing specially queer about that. It reminds me of a lower caste community sing, she told Bernard. But a little later it was reminding her a good deal less of that innocuous function, for suddenly there had swarmed up from those round chambers underground a ghastly troop of monsters, hideously masked or painted out of all semblance of humanity. They had tramped out a strange limping dance round the square, round and round again, singing as they went, round and round, each time a little faster, and the drums had changed and quickened their rhythm, so that it became like the pulsing of fever in the ears, and the crowd had begun to sing with the dancers, louder and louder, and first one woman had shrieked, and then another, as though they were being killed. And then suddenly the leader of the dancers broke out of the line, ran to a big wooden chest which was standing at one end of the square, raised the lid and pulled out a pair of black snakes. A great yell went up from the crowd, and all the other dancers ran towards him with outstretched hands. He tossed the snakes to the first comers, then dipped back into the chest for more and more. Black snakes and brown and mottled, he flung them out, and then with the dance began again on a different rhythm. Round and round they went with their snakes, snakily, with a soft, undulating movement at the knees and hips, round and round. Then the leader gave a signal, and one after another all the snakes were flung down in the middle of the square. An old man came up from underground and sprinkled them with corn-meal, and from the other hatchway came a woman and sprinkled them with water from a black jar. Then the old man lifted his hand, and, startlingly, terrifyingly, was the absolute silence. The drums stopped beating. Life seemed to have come to an end. The old man pointed towards two hatchways that gave entrance to the lower world, and slowly, raised by invisible hands from below, there emerged from the one a painted image of an eagle, from the other that of a man, naked and nailed to a cross. They hung there, seemingly self-sustained, as though watching. The old man clapped his hands. Naked, but for a white cotton breech cloth, a boy of about 18 stepped out of the crowd and stood before him. His hands crossed over his chest, his head bowed. The old man made the sign of the cross over him and turned away. Slowly, the boy began to walk round the writhing heap of snakes. He had completed the first circuit and was halfway through the second when, from among the dancers, a tall man, wearing the mask of a coyote and holding in his hand a whip of plaited leather, advanced towards him. The boy moved on as though unaware of the other's existence. The coyote man raised his whip. There was a long moment of expectancy, then a swift movement. The whistle of the lash and its loud, flat-sounding impact on the flesh. The boy's body quivered, but he made no sound. He walked on at the same slow, steady pace. The coyote struck again, and at every blow, at first a gasp and then a deep groan went up from the crown. The boy walked. Twice, thrice, 4 times round he went. The blood was streaming. 5 times round, 6 times round. Suddenly Lenina covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Stop them, she implored. But the whip fell and fell inexorably, 7 times around. Then, all at once the boy staggered, and, still without a sound, pitched forward onto his face. Bending over him, the old man touched his back with a long white feather, held it up for a moment, crimson, for the people to see, then shook it thrice over the snakes. A few drops fell, and suddenly the drums broke out again into a panic of hurrying notes. There was a great shout. The dancers rushed forward, picked up the snakes and ran out of the square. Men, women, children, all the crowd ran after them. A minute later the square was empty. Only the boy remained, prone where he had fallen, quite still. 3 old men came out of one of the houses and with some difficulty lifted him and carried him in. The eagle and the man on the cross kept guard for a little while over the empty pueblo, then, as though they had seen enough, sank slowly down through their hatchways, out of sight, into the netherworld. Alright guys, that makes it 5 p.m. in the Netherlands, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 9th of July 2016. And I'm thinking of doing some poker face. What do you guys say? I'm gonna see if we can find some poker face. Let's see. Pala. Poker face is incoming. I can't play YouTube directly from YouTube because Google needs me to do this in order to continue using Google services. It says, to be consistent with data protection laws, we're asking you to take a moment to review the key points. This isn't about changes we've made, it's just a chance to review some key points. We'll need you to do this. Well, and then you can click next, right? Well, if they're asking me to take a moment, I can just decline, right? But apparently you can't, because if you don't click next, you can't get anywhere. I had this before, and 2 weeks later it was gone. Waiting for it to go again, but what I have to do now is go to Real Liberty Media. In the chat there, you can just type /join and then type in Sol, for instance. Now I've just made a channel called Sol. There I can enter my YouTube, then I can open that there, and then I can play the fracking YouTube. So, they're not catching me, but it's ridiculous, right? This is, I don't know, live. So, let's see what they got, guys.
So we're going to play a half hour for you folks, give you all this freedom-minded America First, rights first movement stuff that we've been doing for about 10 years. Big concern in our vocabulary is the bogus war on drugs. It's more like the war on some drugs, only the ones that you and I can't grow or make in our kitchen. Seriously, if we're not paying the tax man, they're coming to get you. This song's called I Want to Get High. When I sit on this mountain, high above the plain, when I fly like This next song is called Just an Excuse.
Poker face! Welcome back, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur event. I'm your host, Walter Hendricks, coming to you from Holland. We're reading Brave New World. After we finish this, we're going to do Brave New World Revisited if possible. I need to figure that out, but I think it might be possible. That lighter is just awful. This one's better. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Let's pick it up where we left off. Lenina was still sobbing. Too awful, she kept repeating. And all Bernard's consolations were in vain. Too awful, that blood, she shuddered. Oh, I wish I had my soma. There was the sound of the feet in the inner room. Lenina did not move, but sat with her face in her hands, unseeing, apart. Only Bernard turned around. The dress of the young man who now stepped out of the terrace was Indian, but his plaited hair was straw-colored. His eyes were pale blue, and his skin, a white skin, bronzed. "Hello, good morrow," said the stranger, in faultless but peculiar English. "You're civilized, aren't you? You come from the other place, outside the reservation." "Who on earth?" began Bernard in astonishment. The young man sighed and shook his head. "A most unhappy gentleman," and, pointing to the bloodstains in the center of the squares, "Did you see that damned spot?" he asked, in a voice that trembled with emotion. "A gram is better than a dam," said Lenina mechanically from behind her hands. "I wish I had my soma." "I ought to have been there," the young man went on. "Why wouldn't they let me be the sacrifice? I'd have gone round 10 times, 12, 15. Palovita only goes as far as 7. They could have had twice as much blood from me. The multitudinous seas incarnadine." He flung out his arms in a lavish gesture, then despairingly let them fall again. "But they wouldn't let me. They disliked me for my complexion. It's always been like that. Always." Tears stood in the young man's eyes. He was ashamed and turned away. Astonishment made Lenina forget the deprivation of soma. She uncovered her face and, for the first time, looked at the stranger. "Do you mean to say that you wanted to be hit with that whip?" Still averted from her, the young man made a sign of affirmation. "For the sake of the pueblo, to make the rain come and the corn grow. And to please Pocon and Jesus. And then to show that I can bear pain without crying out. Yes." And his voice suddenly took on a new resonance. He turned with a proud squaring of the shoulders, a proud, defiant lifting of the chin, "to show that I'm a man. Oh," he gave a gasp and was silent, gaping. He had seen, for the first time in his life, the face of a girl whose cheeks were not the color of chocolate or dogskin, whose hair was auburn and permanently waved, and whose expression, amazing novelty, was one of benevolent interest. Lenina was smiling at him. Such a nice-looking boy, she was thinking, and a really beautiful body. The blood rushed up into the young man's face. He dropped his eyes, raised them again for a moment, only to find her still smiling at him, and was so much overcome that he had to turn away and pretend to be looking very hard at something on the other side of the square. Bernard's questions made a diversion. Who, how, when, from where? Keeping his eyes fixed on Bernard's face, for so passionately did he long to see Lenina smiling that he simply dared not look at her. The young man tried to explain himself. Linda and he, Linda was his mother, the word made Lenina look uncomfortable, were strangers in the reservation. Linda had come from the other place long ago, before he was born, with a man who was his father. Bernard pricked up his ears. She had gone walking alone in those mountains over there to the north, had fallen down a steep place and hurt her head. Go on, said Bernard excitedly. Some hunters from Malpais had found her and brought her to the pueblo. As for the man who was his father, Linda had never seen him again. His name was Tomakin. Yes, Thomas was the DHC's first name. He must have flown away, back to the other place, away without her, a bad, unkind, unnatural man. And so I was born in Malpais, he concluded. In Malpais, and he shook his head. The squalor of that little house on the outskirts of the pueblo. A space of dust and rubbish separated it from the village. 2 famine-stricken dogs were nosing obscenely in the garbage at its doors. Inside, when they entered, the twilight stank and was loud with flies. Linda, the young man called. From the inner room, a rather hoarse female voice said, "Coming!" They waited. In bowls on the floor were the remains of meal, perhaps of several meals. The door opened. A very stout, blonde squaw stepped across the threshold and stood looking at the strangers, staring incredulously, her mouth open. Lenina noticed with disgust that 2 of her front teeth were missing, and the color of the ones that remained. She shuddered. It was worse than the old man, so fat, and all the lines in her face, the flabbiness, the wrinkles, and the sagging cheeks, with those purplish blotches, and the red veins on her nose, the bloodshot eyes, and that neck, and the blanket she wore over her head, ragged and filthy, and under the brown sack-shaped tunic, those enormous breasts, the bulge of her stomach, the hips. Oh, much worse than the old man, much worse. And suddenly the creature burst out in a torrent of speech, rushed at her with outstretched arms, and Ford, it was too revolting. In another moment she'd be sick-pressed her against the bosom, and began to kiss her. Ford, to kiss, slobberingly, and smelt too horrible, obviously never had a bath, and simply reeked of that beastly stuff that was put into Delta and Epsilon bottles. No, it wasn't true about Bernard. Positively stank of alcohol. She broke away as quickly as she could. A blubbered and distorted face confronted her. The creature was crying. "Oh, my dear," the torrent of words flowed sobbingly. "If you knew how glad, after all these years, a civilized face. Yes, and civilized clothes. Because I thought I should never see a piece of real acetate silk again. She fingered the sleeve of Lenina's shirt. The nails were black, and those adorable viscose velveteen shorts. Do you know, dear, I've still got my old clothes, the ones I came in, put away in a box. I'll show them you afterwards. Though, of course, the acetate has all gone into holes, but such a lovely white bandolier. Though, I must say, your green morocco is even lovelier. Not that it did me much good, that bandolier. Her tears began to flow again. I suppose John told you what I had to suffer, and not a gram of soma to be had, only a drink of mescal every now and then, when Pope used to bring it. Pope is a boy I used to know, but it makes you feel so bad afterwards, the mescal does, and you're sick with the peyote. Besides, it always made that awful feeling of being ashamed much worse the next day. And I was so ashamed. Just think of it. Me, a beta, having a baby. Put yourself in my place. The mere suggestion made Lenina shudder, though it wasn't my fault, I swear, because I still don't know how it happened, seeing that I did all the Malthusian drill, you know, by numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, always, I swear it. But all the same it happened, and of course there wasn't anything like an abortion center here. It's still down in Chelsea. Is it still down in Chelsea, by the way? She asked. Lenina nodded. And still floodlighted on Tuesdays and Fridays? Lenina nodded again. That lovely pink glass tower. Poor Linda lifted her face and with closed eyes aesthetically contemplated the bright remembered image. And the river at night, she whispered. Great tears oozed slowly from behind her tight-shut eyelids. And flying back in the evening from Stoke Poges. And then a hot bath and a vibro vacuum massage. But there. She drew a deep breath, shook her head, opened her eyes again, sniffed once or twice, then blew her nose on her fingers and wiped them on the skirt of her tunic. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said in response to Lenina's involuntary grimace of disgust. I ought to have done that. I oughtn't not to, right? Have done that. I'm sorry. But what are you to do when there aren't any handkerchiefs? I remember how it used to upset me, all that dirt, and nothing being aseptic. I had an awful cut on my head when they first brought me here. You can't imagine what they used to put on it. Filth, just filth. Civilization is sterilization, I used to say to them, and step to Cockgee to Banbury Tea to see a fine bathroom, and we see. Water closet, WC. As though they were children, but of course they didn't understand. How should they? And in the end I suppose I got used to it. And anyhow, how can you keep this clean when there isn't any hot water laid on? And look at these clothes. These beastly wool isn't like acetate. It lasts and lasts, and you're supposed to mend it if it gets torn. But I'm a beta. I worked in the fertilizing room. Nobody ever taught me to do anything like that. It wasn't my business. Besides, I never used to be right to mend clothes. Throw them away when they've got holes in them and buy new. The more stitches, the less riches. Isn't that right? Mending's antisocial. But it's all different here. It's like living with lunatics. Everything they do is mad. She looked round, saw John and Bernard, had left them and were walking up and down in the dust and garbage outside the house. But, nonetheless, confidentially lowering her voice and leaning while Lenina stiffened and shrank so close that the brown reek of embryo poison stirred the hair and her cheek. For instance, she hoarsely whispered, "Take the way they have one another here. Mad, I tell you, absolutely mad. Everybody belongs to everyone else, don't they? Don't they?" she insisted, tugging at Lenina's sleeve. Lenina nodded her averted head, let out the breath she had been holding, and managed to draw another one, relatively untainted. "Well, here," the other went on, "nobody's supposed to belong to more than one person. And if you have people in the ordinary way, the others think you're wicked and antisocial. They hate and despise you. Once a lot of women came and made a scene about their men came to see me. Well, why not? And then they rushed at me. No, it was too awful. I can't tell you about it." Linda covered her face with her hands and shuddered. "They're so hateful, the women here. Mad and cruel. And of course they don't know anything about Malthusian drill, or bottles, or decanting, or anything of that sort." Hold on, guys. What the fuck is with my lighters? Where were we? So they're having children all the time like dogs. It's too revolting. And to think that Ford, and yet John was even a great comfort to me. I don't know what I should have done without him, even though he did get so upset whenever a man, quite as a tiny boy even, once, but that was when he was bigger, he tried to kill poor Yahushua, or was it Popeye, just because I used to have them sometimes, because I never could make him understand that that was what civilized people ought to do. Being mad is infectious, I believe. Anyhow, John seems to have got it from the Indians, because, of course, he was with them a lot, even though they always were so beastly to him and wouldn't let him do all the things the other boys did. Which was a good thing in a way, because it made it easier for me to condition him, a little. Though you've no idea how difficult that is. There's so much one doesn't know. It wasn't my business to know. I mean, when a child asks you how a helicopter works and who made the world, well, what are you to answer if you're a beta and have only worked in the fertilizing room? What are you to answer? That was the end of chapter 7. So we're on to 8. Chapter 8. Outside, in the dust and among the garbage, there were 4 dogs now. Bernard and John were walking slowly up and down. "So hard for me to realize," Bernard was saying, "to reconstruct, as though we were living on different planets in different centuries. A mother, and all this dirt, and gods, and old age, and disease." He shook his head. "It's almost inconceivable. I shall never understand unless you explain." "Explain what?" This, he indicated the pueblo, that. And it was the little house outside the village. Everything, all your life. But what is there to say? From the beginning, as far back as you can remember. As far back as I can remember, John frowned. There was a long silence. It was very hot. They had eaten a lot of tortillas and sweet corn. Linda said, "Come and lie down, baby." They lay down together in the big bed. "Sing." And Linda sang. Sang, "Step to Crook G to Banbury Tea," and "Bye baby banting, soon you'll need decanting." Her voice got fainter and fainter. There was a loud noise, and she woke with a start. A man was saying something to Linda, and Linda was laughing. She had pulled the blanket up to her chin, but the man pulled it down again. His hair was like two black ropes, and round his arm was a lovely silver bracelet with blue stones in it. He liked the bracelet, but all the same he was frightened. He hid his face against Linda's body. Linda put her hand on him, and he felt safer. In those other words he did not understand so well, she said to the man, "Not with John here." The man looked at him, then again at Linda, and said a few words in a soft voice. Linda said no, but the man bent over the bed towards him, and his face was huge, terrible. The black ropes of hair touched the blanket. "No," said Linda again, and he felt her hand squeezing him more tightly. "No," but the man took hold of one of his arms, and it hurt. He screamed. The man put up his other hand and lifted him up. Linda was still holding him, still saying no. The man said something short and angry, and suddenly her hands were gone. "Linda, Linda," he kicked and wriggled, but the man carried him across the door, opened it, put him down on the floor in the middle of the other room, and went away, shutting the door behind him. He got up, ran to the door. Standing on tiptoe, he could just reach the big wooden latch. He lifted it up and pushed, but the door wouldn't open. "Linda," he shouted. She didn't answer. He remembered a huge room, rather dark, and there were big wooden things with strings fastened to them, and lots of women standing round them, making blankets, Linda said. Linda told them to sit in the corner with other children, while she went and helped the women. He played with the little boys for a long time. Suddenly people started talking very loud, and there was the woman pushing Linda away, and Linda was crying. She went to the door, and he ran after her. He asked her why they were angry. "Because I broke something," she said, and then she got angry too. "How should I know how to do their beastly weaving," she said. "Beastly savages." He asked her what savages were. When they got back to their house, Popeye was waiting at the door, and he came in with them. He had a big gourd full of stuff that looked like water, only it wasn't water, but something with a bad smell that burned your mouth and made you cough. Linda drank some, and Popeye drank some, and then Linda laughed a lot and talked very loud, and then she and Popeye were into the other room. When Popeye went away, he went into the room. Linda was in bed and so fast asleep that he couldn't wake her. Popeye used to come often. He said the stuff from the gourd was called mescal, but Linda said it ought to be called soma. Only it made you feel ill afterwards. He hated Popeye. He hated them all. all the men who came to see Linda. One afternoon, when he had been playing with the other children, it was cold, he remembered, and there was snow on the mountains. He came back to the house and heard angry voices in the bedroom. There were women's voices, and they said words he didn't understand, but he knew they were dreadful words. Then suddenly, crash. Something was upset. He heard people moving about quickly. I'm sorry, Otto, what's going on? And Cap also. These comments in the chat room, I don't get them. What the fuck are flat biscuits? And what's this eekhoorntjesbrood? Otto. I mean, you never hear us blatantly mispronounce eekhoorntjesbrood, do ya? Okay, so this is about my English. Right. Yeah, no problem. Alright, guys. Yeah, eekhoorntjesbrood. Yeah. Yeah, Tom, that's what it looked like. They were messing with, yeah. Yeah. So remember, guys, if you ever wanna come on the radio, that's also a reason why I took these 2 hours a week, It's for you guys. If you wanna come on, all you gotta do is download Skype if you haven't yet, and install that shit. And contact me, Solvinur, at Skype, and I'll get you on air. So. Looks like we have a guest. So, contacts. Come on. Bloop, bloop. One. Yeah. One, he says. Hold on, guys. RSTUV. ABC, DEF, EFG. EA, where's the add to conversation here? There we go. There we go. Okay, weird noise. Weird noise on his end, he says. Hello?
Yeah, let me adjust this volume. Maybe that's...
Yeah, you sound like crap, like usual.
Wow. I'm all jacked in here with all my stuff here, but we had some kind of light storm last night. And acting really hokey. So I'm getting some sputtering noises.
Okay, welcome, Vince. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Walter. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Pretty bad. We had quite a light show here last night, and I've been having hokey internet ever since. I guess all the lines are wet and whatnot. Connections, they just duct tape in the ground out here. But anyway, so I haven't caught up with what the latest trend is now with the cop shooting, but I would have expected that a long time ago. I'm not sure what folks are saying about it, this guy having an Army background and whatnot, but I'm kind of like you and don't keep up with the news, so...
Yeah.
What have you heard? Anything?
I've heard that this leader of this Black Lives Matter is what was he used to be? I don't know, but he had some very strange past, and it seems to be a culture creation thing, right? This is not this Black Lives Matter does not seem to be a grassroots thing, but more like a setup, right? To get race riots going and things like that. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. So I wonder, will we see more of the same? Is that's kind of what we'd expect, in this predictable programming that's coming down. More control here. If you've got more violence erupting, create more rift between the law and the common folks. Almost, what we've seen out of your readings of 1984 and now Brave New World.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost a blueprint for the future, what we can expect. And I think most people's response, if you'd say something like that, is, "Oh, that's just nuts," That's all from a movie or from a book. That's not real life.
Was it Soros that's Otto? Is that Soros that was connected with Black Lives Matter? And what's the name of that head guy anyway? That's the one you should look into. I've only seen one video on it with this guy who's acts as if he's done his research, and he's talking about the head of Black Lives Matter being responsible for the shooting of these cops. There were like 4 cops shot or something, 4 cops dead, right? At this Black Lives Matter rally.
Yeah, 5 killed, a dozen.
Wow, yeah, right. So I don't believe, and maybe I'm too naive, but I don't believe that this is grassroots, right? I think that this is a setup. This is done on purpose. They were snipers, right?
Yeah, and no information released last I know of on the other 3 called suspects in custody.
Yeah.
A guy saying he acted alone. And, it looks like another operation where maybe they got corralled, one of these craft.
Yeah, that's what I'm suspicious of, that it's a false flag, so to speak.
Yeah, it really reeks high of that.
BLM? What's BLM?
Black Lives Matter.
Ah, of course, yeah. Soros is the money man, DeRay McKesson, and Sean King. I think the guy in the video that I was mentioning was DeRay McKesson. He seems to have been the head of something like decades ago or something, which went very bad. Let's see if we can Google this. Copy. Paste. Past.
So, what's your thoughts on this, Otto? Where do you think what do you think we're looking at? It definitely looks like Black Ops to me. But I don't understand, why wouldn't they just have dropped their weapons? And they had plenty of time to escape, I would have thought. Usually, that's what we see if, say, with the Boston bombing and that sort of thing. The shooters lay blame on somebody and have their scapegoat. Same goes all the way back to Oswald, of course. It's not a new type of operation. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. I watched the second season of Marco Polo on Netflix, and in there they even use the word false flag.
Oh.
The false flag operation in that. Blaming it on Kublai Khan. He's the grandson of Genghis Khan. I read that book. There's one book, The Traveler, by what's his name? Something Jennings. But anyways, been many years ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of historical fiction of Marco Polo, and I actually read the translation of Marco Polo. I think my brother's got that book. I think I divvied up my library, I gave him those books. But yeah, back to Machiavelli and the Prince. We see these operations carried out day to day, and it's straight out of the playbook. And of course, the common folks they're so busy trying to, make a living and getting by, having what fun they can when they can. And, most of this stuff is lost to folks and just a carrying on of life. So, with how you said the other day you had a hard time understanding how. I don't know. It's kind of weird how languages all tie together, even a Yankee accent and a Southern accent. But there's that Western accent that has that Southernese to it. So I think Hal is kind of explicit in saying what he sees and how we are to look at it. A lot of folks aren't catching how he's not giving us instructions. He's giving a revealing of what's taking place and how it's applied. So we look at how it's been set up through the leader code.
People in the chat are saying they can't hear you. Now it must be something with how you set this up, because I can hear you. But
can't hear me at all?
So what?
Can't hear me at all?
Well, barely, they say.
I'm turning up volume here. Wonder if that does any good.
Yeah, try that.
All right. Well, we'll see here in a minute when it gets downstream.
Well, it doesn't seem to have changed for me, but...
Well, doggone it. I said, well, doggone it. I'm gonna do something different here. I'm gonna unplug all this. I'll be right back.
All right, so... yeah. If you can't hear him, then something has to be done, right? Yeah, it's not something that plays here in the Netherlands, this Black Lives Matter, for as far as I know, anyway. We do have some racial tendencies, though, I think. Some racial difficulties. This is a reason why the so-called Party for Freedom has gained so much popularity among the Dutch. Yeah. But
all right, how's that?
All right, so that may be better.
All righty. Yeah, I think everything's wet. I don't think it's actually me. I think it's the system. We got a bunch of rain last night.
Yeah, I think you should be heard better now on the stream. Well,
all right. I might have more background noise here, but maybe that's better.
Well, actually, it's less for me. You sound much clearer now.
Good. Right.
So, but the thing about racism here in the Netherlands, it's still that it's only white people that do it, right? That's the idea that's still, around. Racism is something for white people to do, when I think that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think just society in itself here shows that most people are not racist. Bigoted, perhaps, some prejudiced. Of course, I think we're all prejudiced in some form or fashion. It's a matter of culture. It's a matter of preference and the dealings that and how we act day to day. So with subcultures, of course, a lot of that, and especially with the black neighborhood, it's been socially engineered. It's keeping the black man shackled, and in a sense, we're all shackled together. But we're in there at the oars, rowing away here, propelling this beast along, and fail to recognize that we are all shackled together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's happening at a moment in time where we are going through so many changes. It's hardly comprehensible the rate of change, for instance, thousands of years ago, 10,000s of years ago, the further you go back, the less change, quote unquote, you see. And when, let's say, we started climbing out of the trees for the first time, we started creating a culture, so to speak, still based on hunter-gathering basis. The changes that came slowly, very slowly. It took thousands of years for a culture to change. And then later, with the Industrial Revolution, it only took like 100 years for a culture to completely change. And now we are in the middle of a culture change again. And it's going so fast that it's hard to keep up, right? It's hard to keep up. And what we think as being normal at the age of 50, right? You know, there's people running around the age of 20 now who do not consider the things normal that we consider normal at the age of 50, right? So those are enormous changes, and it's hard for society to keep together, I think, also, in those kinds of circumstances.
Okay, I was fetching some coffee here.
Yeah,
I would have some contention in your statement. I'd say we started out superior and have devolved.
That's possible too. Yes,
that has to do with my ideology too. So
yeah, that's quite possible. It ties back to the idea of the Great Golden Age and things like that, which the mythological stories are full of. And you shouldn't just, throw those away and say it's all garbage. So, yeah, it's quite possible. Especially with the creation of megalithic features that spring up all over the world. And also having the same form, indicating a kind of communication between all these various peoples. Creating pyramids, for instance, they're all over the world, not just in Egypt. So yeah, it's quite possible that highly civilized people were here long before us. Yeah.
Pretty fascinating, especially the history that we find covered up. Let's see. Okay, I'm all set up. I kept getting knocked out here, so I'm reset back up over it to go show Noel at the end here.
Yeah, fine. Oh, thanks for doing that, by the way, Vince.
You bet.
And when this show is finished, and at RLM Radio, reallibertymedia.com, the dork table will begin, I think. It's supposed to begin. Are you gonna be there, or is that nothing that you?
Yeah, I probably won't. I'm actually just enjoying time away.
Okay.
I'll tell you how far away I am. When you said hit show now, my mind did not even comprehend.
Yeah, so I was like, that's a term you ought to recognize, right? So
I didn't. My brain did not even recognize it. I just didn't disconnect from radio.
Okay,
But, I was interested in kind of getting some opinions on this shooting there. And I'll tell you what, my experience with the cops in Dallas is that they are perhaps some of the more friendly cops. I mean, they're less likely just to stomp you for no good reason. The worst whooping I ever got by anybody was cops in Fort Worth, Texas. And I got arrested in Dallas for a warrant there for that. And I went before a judge, and she was trying to give me a fine. I told her I wasn't about to pay no money for an ass whipping. But a cop in Dallas that arrested me, he said, yeah, them Fort Worth cops are a bunch of cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's very pervasive now for especially being black. But you ain't got to be black or brown. You can be just as white as I and get killed by the cops. I've taken it to a highway patrol and called him to question on him wanting to just identify me as I'm traveling down the road.
Mhm.
So when I catch him out again, I have another lesson for him, or further lessons for him.
Mhm.
Look, we can't just keep going on and letting things go the way we are. We have to bring to account these folks, especially that are sitting in seats of decision, and have the ability to execute you on sight. So there's a lot of validity in the Black Lives Matter, no matter the co-opting, just like, Oath Keepers. There's a lot of contention with the leadership there. But the idea is sound and something that needs to be addressed, and not let it be a division between black and white. It all affects us pretty much the same. But honestly, though, being black is you got a better chance of being pulled over by the highway pirates and searched and look for something that they can kidnap you on and then hold you for ransom and then cause you to pay fines and all this other stuff. It's just piracy.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Lysander Spooner, right? He said that government is worse than what are they, highwaymen? They were used to be called, right?
Yeah.
That's the correct spelling, the correct word. Because a highwayman, he won't come back every month.
Here's one for you. Now, we drive on the right side of the road here in the Americas, and actually, driving on the other side of the road is actually the right. The left side's the right side. When you were passing, you had your sword arm to bear at approaching traffic. So kind of
Yes.
It was a type of a punishment, I think, to have to drive on the wrong side of the road and not being able to defend yourself against these highwaymen that approach you. So.
Yeah. Indeed, that's very good. Yeah. So only in Britain they drive at the right side, right?
The left side's the right side. Don't they drive that way? And
I was
what
like,
side of the road
sorry, go ahead.
What side of the road they drive on there in Holland?
The right side, of course.
Oh, well, you've been punished too.
Yeah. But
Down under
Britain left the EU, or at least they're going to try to do that. And there was this article in the Express.co and also later at, I think it was the Times, not sure. Anyway, mainstream newspapers. And they came with this article that stated that the German and French ministers of foreign affairs, I think they were, with this plan to, just abolish nations' armies and abolish nations' law system, criminal system, and just make one big fracking Europe. And I was like, what? I'm seriously scared a little, I was like, how dare these people tell us that we are not allowed to have our own army? This is an act of war, right?
You sounded like Joe Dirt. What? Otto says, I think in light of the cops' new bunkered down attitude, I think that my efforts to, talking about me, educate the constabulary, wait a minute, I got covered over here, greatly and significantly increases my odds of achieving room temperature by being shot.
No, but think of it, right? In America, people are afraid that they're taking away your guns. And here, they just take away our fracking army. How bad can it get, right?
It can get much worse, and will, undoubtedly. And, unless we can tilt this thing, that's what we're trying to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say thanks, Walter. It was pretty crappy on my end here trying to fight this thing. But anyways, I appreciate you coming on. I was just really curious about how this thing's moving along.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
All right, Walter.
I've got like 1 minute left or so I'm going to do the roll call. and kick you off because it's the end of the show.
Big love, y'all. Thanks.
Take care, Vince. That was Vince. You can find him in the internet, Vince easily, in many forms. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We'll pick up Brave New World next week. And thanks for coming to the UCY lobby. And ucylobby.chatango.com. We need a better chat page, by the way. Everybody in the chat room, Baconator, Captain Gringo, and Dale, and Cooper, and I am Lone Frog, and Jane, and JJ, and Joe Friday.
The very word secrecy is
one of the people I know the longest, I think.
And we are, as a people,
Juana Taco, Matty Clues, Merbley, Otto, and Shirley, Tomato, and Vince, and to announce. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. I'll be back next week.
How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of...
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.